Hey, Neo fam, happy Tuesday to you. It's Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026. It's about 1:45 p.m. Central Time. So we've got about an hour and 15 minutes left in the trade day, but I wanted to get an update out. We were supposed to get updated data on the FTD side of things, and we're probably not going to get that this week. My guess is it's because of the government shutdown. And by the way, this is also part of the time frame where the government shutdown was going on, the previous government shutdown. So I think we're going to have to wait even longer on this already lagged trailing data. But I do think it's worth noting and referencing that this over 4.5 million spike that is the most recent that we've seen shouldn't be happening with such low trade volume. So, for example, right now, not even 25 million shares traded today. That's incredibly low volume. And it's crazy to think that there wouldn't be shares available with such low interest, such low sentiment. And this also maybe aligns, and that's one of the reasons I was looking forward to the next batch of data. And I still will. I just think we're going to have to take it with maybe another asterisk and wait a full month, maybe even 2 months to see what may come through on that side of things. Because again, we don't really know what's going on with these gaps. These are cumulative on the white lines representing the FTDs, and so these can move forward day to day to day to day. We don't necessarily know that this was all in one day. However, this is a big spike, and we hadn't seen a lot of that in a while, especially with such low trade volumes. So that's why it's remained on my radar and something I'm continuing to track. I may come back with some closing thoughts on that in just a minute, but I wanted to point this out because Monday, February 2nd, which of course came on the heels of NIO with very strong delivery numbers from January compared to the rest of the Chinese market. I did notice something with NIO and XPeng or XPEV or Xiaopeng. XPEV is the ticker. I'm going to show you right now. This is Monday pre-market for NIO, 4 a.m. Eastern time, and then market open. And I've got these queued up to about the same time frames. So you can see now XPEV pre-market, 4 a.m. Eastern time on Monday, and then market open. Pretty similar, I thought. But I have maintained the view that I think NIO is probably getting shorted in a number of baskets. So that could include NIO being considered and traded as a meme stock, and in a basket that's shorted by folks with respect to that, also as a Chinese stock, also as an EV stock, also as a Chinese tech stock, perhaps even more than that. And that could be one of the reasons we see so much downside pressure so much of the time. The flip side of that is, of course, it also means there's potential upside moves that NIO can make very aggressively, as we've seen in the past. But those usually don't come unless we see big trade volume, like 100 million share trade volume or more on a single day. This is what we're seeing today. The market had a little bit of a sell-off earlier, so it's not looking as consistent with even the market, but also not the same as XPEV. I just wanted to be consistent and show both days. If we come back, though, to this now, zoom out a little bit. So you can see the full history of NIO Stock, and then the data that we have on the FTD side of things. This, of course, was after the meteoric rise and run from NIO Stock, where in a 6-month period we had the stock price go from $3.50 to over $55, and there were about 75 days of 100 million share trade volume or more for NIO. And so not only did the FTDs drop off, but we saw big volume for a lot of days. So again, when I come back to this and I'm thinking, gosh, not even 25 million shares traded, it not only seems crazy to think that unless manipulation is involved by perhaps big money, including the market maker, the suspicious short citadel that I've talked about, and especially there's an alignment of the timeframes with the January 16th expiry that I was watching with about, I think it was 800,000 contracts that were going to expire out of the money, and max pain price point for that time frame was about $5. It actually changed and dropped down near that date to, I think, $4.50, but the price point came in below the $5 target range that I was watching for. And that was even with now, as we get this delayed lag data, at least one really big spike on the FTD side of things with low volume, which is kind of interesting because if you want to make the bear case, and I'll shout out to people from the comments section, I think one was maybe just trolling and suggested $3 for NIO stock in the short term. But then also PB shout out was asking about, what about double digits in this year of 2026? And here's my thought on it. I think the trade volume remains the easiest indicator for us to track without talking any TA. And that's because, for example, when we saw the NIO stock price move up from below the $4 price range to about $8, we had some days of 100 million share trade volume, and we had some back to back, and that's when the stock price was moving up. But you can't ignore all this, the white lines here. This is a lot of FTD data. And so if we have so few shares being traded on the daily side of things, and the last day I think that we had a 100 million share trade volume day was late October of 2025. So it's been months now, and yet the price isn't lower. That makes $3 seem pretty unlikely. However, if NIO Stock could go down to $3, then I would expect the trade volume to remain low, and I would expect to continue to see this kind of FTD activity moving forward. Since it's always lagged, delayed, trailing data, and now, thanks to the US government shutdowns, which have made it even further lagged and delayed data, it makes it harder for us to look back. We'll have to wait. I'm frankly going to probably expect 2 months to be able to see anything consistent looking back. And so, unfortunately, that's where we are. But on the daily side of things, the trade volume, if it remains low and we don't see NIO stock go down or move down, and shout out to Laser, by the way, who on his in his most recent video talked about how the $4.38 price point or level could get hit, and I think it did this week. So let's see what happens moving forward. But it's a fascinating time. If we're talking about moves to the upside, I think that March, April, and this is what I told PB in my response to the possibility of double digits. I think we could see something as early as March or April like that. However, I don't think we'll see it unless we see big trade volume. So, I think with the trade volume, that can end up being an indicator of sentiment, as this sort of trade volume does not make me think that sentiment is incredibly high or bullish for NIO. And that is, I'm not talking about the long-term NIO folks who are really thinking in terms of long-term, because frankly, if you're long-term like I am, you're not really worried about the day-to-day price movements. That's the reality, but that's also a very different view and take than, let's say, the, folks who are holding the 800,000 roughly contracts that expired with max pain price point being in play in that January 16th timeframe here early in the year in 2026. So I do think the easiest thing, and that's why I've kept them at the bottom of the screen, is the three short-term stock price indicators for NIO that, for me, not being a TA guy, are the easiest for me to track. It's the trade volume, which again, I can see that every single day. The FTD data, which unfortunately is even further lagged and delayed now than it normally would be. Normally, it could be up to about a month out and possibly more. So now, as I said, I'm just going to assume that we won't get a good sense of things until maybe 2 months from now. March, I think we'll have interesting things happening. I think NIO will probably do their quarter four from 2025 and full year earnings. And so that'll be interesting if they hit profitability. For the quarter, will Wall Street or anybody else be paying attention? Will we see the trade volume come up if it remains subdued and very low like it has? Also, will sentiment follow that? Will it trend up following? And maybe that trade volume ends up being a good indicator of just that, the sentiment shifting. So I don't know, just wanted to share some of my thoughts and a little of the data and research as I was hoping we would have the updated FTD data, but I doubt we'll get it. And I don't know how long we'll have to wait. So whenever we do get it, I'll share whatever we get and we'll talk about it then. But thanks for sticking around at the end. I know some of you did, and I did go over 8 minutes for this video, so I will create chapters or timestamps to make it a little easier to navigate in case you don't want to watch or listen from beginning to end. Thanks, and I'll see y'all again very soon.